Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very last recording on human reproduction. Male and female symbols below. You see are the male one is the one with the arrow sticking out, which is basically supposed to be a spear, I believe, indicating warfare and male kind of fighting. And the female one is the one with the cross underneath. They're also the symbol of the planets. The female one here is for the planet Venus, and the male one is for the planet Mars, which is also was the god of war, and Venus was the goddess of love. Now, we go to the next slide here, and we'll see something kind of interesting. These are two frogs. The male is on the top, and what they do is they squeeze. The male is going to squeeze her, and that will stimulate her to lay her 400 or 500 little eggs, and then he'll squirt sperm on the eggs from the outside. There's no penis or anything like that that enters the female. It is just a squirt of sperm that comes right out of the male, and then travels throughout the eggs and fertilizes them outside the body. That's called external fertilization. Now, why do we reproduce this way? Why do we have to have this kind of situation? Well, the reason is because we're so complex. We have so many genes, and there's so many ways that they can go wrong. So there has to be kind of a backup. And so what happens here is that the male sperm has one complete set of genes in it for every protein that this frog or human has to actually make. And the female has in her eggs another one set of genes complete for her in her body. And so what happens when the eggs and sperm fuse together, and you end up with a cell that's called diploid, which is two sets of genes in it. If there's some bad genes on the male side, it's very unlikely that the very, very same genes would be bad the same way in the female one. And so let's say on chromosome number 6, there's a bad gene for something that could be deadly, and it's in the male sperm. And in the female, on her chromosome 6, the gene is okay. So if there's two chromosome 6s in the fertilized egg, because the egg and sperm fuse together, then the good one backs up the bad one. And they say in any human set of genes, thousands and thousands of them, there's got to be a few that are deadly or at least harmful. They're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Nobody has a perfect set of genes. So it's possible that if you have a sex with a girl, or if you're a girl you have sex with a boy, the sperm will fertilize the egg, and the whole set of genes from the sperm and the whole set of genes from the egg will combine, and any bad genes from the male will be backed up by the good genes in the female, and any bad genes in the female will be backed up by the good genes in the male. This is why incest is probably not a good idea, because the two sets of chromosomes would be too similar, and you would not get that good backup set. There could be bad genes in both sets in the same place, and that could be a problem. But in terms of just ordinary life, and if your partner is not really closely related to you, it's very unlikely that the mistakes in her set of genes would be different, would be the same as the mistakes in the boy set of genes. And so that is a nice way to end up having two sets of genes in every cell, and if there's any bad ones, they're backed up by the other set. That's why one of the reasons we have sex. Another reason we have sex is because it creates diversity. Every sperm is genetically different. Every egg is genetically different. So depending on what egg and what sperm fuses together, that's the kid you're going to. And every single one of them are going to be different, as you know. And that gives diversity. If we reproduced asexually, every kid would look the same as the parents and as each other. And that would not work too well. And you can see other animals have sex. The boy is the little one here. Same idea. And there's some ladybugs, I think. And here we have, this is a sea anemone. And in some cases, in some animals, they can reproduce without sex. And what they do is they basically break in half. Now, sea anemones don't have bloodstream, so they can do that and not bleed to death like if we did that. We couldn't cut ourselves in half and then each half grow a new other half, like some worms do. But here we have a sea anemone doing that, and you're going to end up with two sea anemones that are exactly the same. That's basically a cloning situation. One of the disadvantages of asexual reproduction is that all the progeny are genetically the same. And so if there's a problem, it's a problem for everybody. If there's diversity, it's going to be a problem for just some. There's an aphid actually giving live birth. You can see some animals besides humans do actually give live birth, like instead of just laying eggs. And here's our friends, the frogs again. You can see the female is laid her eggs, and they're sticky, and they land on this pond, some pondweed or something like that. And the male is going to squirt his sperm onto them. One of the reasons she makes so many eggs is because of that. It's unlikely that every one of them will get fertilized, because it's not like in a human where the sperm is directed directly to the egg inside the woman. Here, it's just random, and the sperm have to get to the eggs. You can actually squirt his sperm in the wrong direction, which it looks like he's doing here, and none of them would get fertilized. Also, another reason why there's so many eggs is because even if there are a lot of tadpoles produced by this, most of them won't survive the rigors of living in a pond. Things will eat them, or they'll die from other reasons, and just a few of them will survive into frogs. If they only made 1 or 2 eggs, it's very likely the frogs would be extinct by now. Then we get to this picture. This picture is a sea urchin egg, but it could be just a human egg too. And you can see it's surrounded by sperm. And the point of this slide is to show you that it takes more than 1 sperm to fertilize an egg. And in human beings, when the egg leaves the ovary, a lot of the membranes around the ovary come out with it, and it surrounds the egg. And there's lots of sort of barriers from for the sperm to get into the egg. Each sperm has what they call an acrosome, which is an area where they have some enzymes, some digestive enzymes to eat through this stuff to get into the egg. But 1 sperm doesn't have enough. So they say, you have to have a good number of sperm surrounding the egg before enough of the outer membranes around the egg get eaten away so that 1 can get in. Once 1 sperm gets in, it loses its tail or undulopodium, and its nucleus will eventually fuse with the egg's nucleus, and you'll end up with nice 2 sets of genes we talked about. And no other sperm will be allowed in. Now, you even say some animals actually do take care of their young too. Here's a invertebrate animal that's actually carrying their eggs on their back to make sure that most of them survive. There's lots of strategies out there for survival for species. Now, in terms of humans, we're going to take a look at the male reproductive system and then the female reproductive system. And when we're done with that, we'll be done with all the recordings in the course. Now, in the male reproductive system, you have the testes, which are outside the body. And the reason they're outside the body and surrounded by sort of a sac of skin called a scrotum is because they need to be cooler than the actual body temperature to make the sperm efficient. They should be around 92, 93 degrees instead of the 98 that's inside the body. And so it basically provides natural air conditioning for the sperm so that they don't get so hot that they would not be produced properly. If you cut the testes, you'll look a little bit like an orange or a grapefruit. There are sections, and each section contains tubules. And those tubules are called seminiferous tubules because they make the semen. And the sperm is actually produced inside those tubules. If you take all the tubules in a man's testes and put them end to end, they would be hundreds of feet long. And then once the sperm are produced, they're stored behind the testes in a sac called the epididymis. The epididymis can store hundreds of millions of sperm at a time. And when the man is going to have sex and have the baby, the sperms come out, then the epididymis will empty into those tubes you see there and end up outside the body. If the man doesn't have sex, there's white blood cells around in there that will actually eat the sperm up and destroy them as they get older. And so always the sperm in the epididymis is refreshed by new sperm all the time. and it doesn't, increase the tremendous number because of the white blood cells that destroy the older ones. Now, once these sperm are going to leave the body, they are pumped through a tube. The tube is called the vas deferens. It's a very long tube that goes all the way around the bladder, above the bladder, and then behind it, and then joins up with the urethra, I should say, as it leaves the body. The seminiferous tubules, there's one for each testes, and if you're going to have a vasectomy, they call it that because they cut the vas deferens. They'll make a little cut in the scrotum and go in there and grab the the vas deferens with a little hook and cut the vas deferens, tie it off, and so no sperm will ever be able to come out again, and the man will not be able to produce a child. The vas deferens goes around as the sperm come through, and they pass by a series of glands called the seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles will pump food material like glucose and amino acids and things like that into the sperm as they go by, because they need to eat too. They have mitochondria, they need ATP, they do the same cellular respiration that we do. The food and oxygen gets into the mitochondria, cellular respiration occurs, and the energy from the food is released as heat and also to make ATPs for the sperm, especially for the sperm's tail to wiggle. Now, once that goes past the seminal vesicles, they go into the prostate gland. Prostate gland is where the vas deferens joins with the urethra. The prostate gland's function is to, and is also with the seminal vesicles too, is to produce a basic fluid. So when the semen comes out of the men, it's actually a little on the alkaline side, the basic side. And the reason for that is because inside the woman's vagina is kind of acidy in there to protect her from infection, especially from bacteria. And so what happens is that when the sperm go in, the acid could damage the sperm. So if the sperm are swimming around in an alkaline or basic fluid that's made by the prostate and the seminal vesicles, acid, some of that acid will be neutralized and give the sperm a better chance to survive as it swims up the female toward the egg. The prostate also activates the sperm to get them to be able to fertilize an egg. And also the muscles in the prostate is what propels the sperm out of the penis and through the urethra and gives the man his feeling of when he has an orgasm of the sperm coming through. This prostate is very important. And but as I said, the prostate can swell as a man gets older and squeeze the urethra, allowing him to have a little problem with the urination. Once the sperm leaves the prostate, it's now has the sperm, the prostate fluid, and the seminal vesicle fluid. It's joined by another fluid coming from the bulbourethral gland, or sometimes called Cowper's gland. And what that is a blood pressure causes action. As the little valves open up and the blood pours into the erectile tissue, it causes the penis to lengthen and get hard with the blood pressure, and actually enable to impregnate the woman. And what happens or so, and then it will go into the female. Now, once it's in there, of course, its job is to get to the egg, and then we get to the female side of the world here, and we'll see what we got. This is the sperm, first of all. You can see the acrosome. The acrosome is the area where the enzyme is to eat its way through into the egg. And remember, many sperm are required for that. The nucleus contains the one set of genes that the sperm have. Sperm and eggs are produced by meiosis. It's a process that changes the diploid cells that have two sets of genes, like in the normal body cells, into cells that have only one set of genes. And each one of those one set of genes is different combinations. And so that's why each sperm can be different genetically from other sperm. And the same thing for the eggs. but they do have a one complete set of genes in them. And then there's lots of mitochondria, as you see, and it's important for that, so that that tail or undulate podium can have the energy to cause the sperm to swim uphill in the female against the currents in her body. And there's a female structure now. You can see that the vagina is the way that the penis, goes in and actually squirts the sperm out, or the semen, I should say, out. And it actually goes right to the cervix, where is the opening to the uterus. Now, the uterus is basically hollow, and so normally when there's no egg around, that's basically it for the sperm. It gets in there a little bit and just basically dies there. White blood cells destroy them. But if she is, ready to have a baby, and there's an egg in the oviduct or in the fallopian tube up top there, the uterus gets full of mucus, and the sperm can actually swim up those mucus strands and get into one or the other of the tubes. Now, hundreds of millions of sperm are put into the girl at a time, and by the time they go into the uterus, many of them never make it to the oviducts or fallopian tubes. And the ones that do actually might even go into the wrong tube that month, and the egg might be in the other one. And they say by the time hundreds of millions of sperm get into the vagina, by the time it gets to the where the egg is, it would be hundreds, or maybe less than 1,000 sperm. Most of them die on the way. Now, in the oviduct, there would be a tube. There is a tube that contains the egg. The egg will come out of the ovary. Now, the ovary doesn't have a hole for the egg to come out, so it actually has to explode out, almost like a pimple exploding. And the egg goes into the oviduct. And if there's sperm, it will get fertilized. Most of the time, the eggs are fertilized in the oviducts or fallopian tubes, not in the uterus. Now, in the oviduct, it's lined with epithelium cells that have cilia. And the cilia will actually push the fertilized egg gently into the uterus so it would embed properly in the uterus. So it's very important that the fertilized egg embed near the top of the uterus so that it can expand like a balloon when the baby starts to grow. If the fertilized egg gets too low and it implants way down near the bottom of the uterus, it will actually expand the cervix and cause a miscarriage and bleeding. So it's very important about where the most miscarriages are caused by that, where the egg actually implants in the uterus. It should implant way up near the top. Now, here's my picture of the female reproductive system slide, and it's very simple. You see, there's the vagina. The cervix is the opening to the uterus, which has some smooth muscle there. It has to open up to let out the baby. That's what they talk about when they talk about that the woman is so many centimeters dilated. That's the opening of the head of the baby, opening that cervix up. The uterus itself is made of sort of bloodyish tissue called endometrium tissue, and it's lots of blood vessels and connective tissue and muscle, smooth muscle, lined in epithelium, and it's basically hollow. And then here are the fallopian or tubes or the oviducts that lead to the ovary. Now you notice the ovary, it doesn't touch the ovary. There's a space there. And it looks like little fingers or fimbriae. And when the egg pops out of the ovary every month, one for each month is the opposite ovary. The actual fingers here, this little hand that looks like a hand, actually has to catch the egg. And the egg has to go into the tube. And if the woman had sex the night before, especially, that would give the sperm time to get into the tube and actually meet the egg here. It's almost a guarantee for pregnancy. And so what happens is that the egg has to not miss here, and so sometimes it does, and the egg ends up in the body cavity, and then it doesn't get fertilized. And sometimes, if it does get fertilized, the sperm actually come out through this space and fertilizes an egg somewhere else. That's called a ectopic pregnancy, or pregnancy outside of the reproductive system. And that can be extremely dangerous. Also, the egg has to move through the tube to the uterus, and that's that columnar epithelium cells that have the cilia actually have to push that egg down in there. If the egg doesn't get in there and starts to grow into a baby in the tube, that could be a tubal pregnancy, and that's also very dangerous and actually can kill the woman and the baby by bleeding to death. Here is a picture of an ovary, and you can see there's various stages of eggs being produced in here. And here's what they call a follicle. Now, these are all follicles or spaces inside the ovary that the eggs are made in. And this is one of them, and you can actually see the egg being produced inside the follicle there. And you can see there's no way out, so the egg has to explode out of the ovary. Here it is actually happening. This is an amazing picture. This is a woman's ovary. They actually use fiber optic cameras for this. And they have the ovary here at the bottom, and then this is the egg blowing out of the ovary, the actual act of ovulation, the egg coming out of the ovary. Some women say they can feel it as a pinch every month. And you can see all this stuff around the egg here. A lot of that has to be eaten away by the hundreds and hundreds of sperm that eventually get to the egg. Remember, one sperm doesn't have enough enzyme to do that. And here's some sperm. That's what they look like, little buggers, and they swim around very quickly. They wiggle their little undulapodia, and they have to swim all the way up to the fallopian tube. It's very hard for them to do that. They're very, very small. And this is inside the seminiferous tubules inside the testes of a man. And you can see that the sperm will be produced and go through this tube, eventually getting into the storage area in the back of the testes called the epididymis. All right, again, this is an ovary, and you can see if you start right here, that's the follicle with the little beginnings of an egg forming inside of it. And as you see, as time goes by, you end up that the follicle gets bigger and bigger and bigger and swells and swells and swells, and then it finally explodes and lets the egg or the secondary oocyte actually leave the body, or leave the ovary, and end up in the fallopian tube. And again, if there's sperm there, there'll be a pregnancy. If not, there won't be. Then what happens later, though, you can see this empty follicle here. The empty follicle is going to do something. It's going to start turning yellow. And that yellow body is very important, and we'll talk about it in the last slide. That's called the corpus luteum, or in Latin, that means yellow body. And the corpus luteum is gonna make some hormones that's going to have an effect on the woman's period, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Eventually, the corpus luteum will disappear. It'll turn white and just disappear, and then the next month, all this will start all over again in the other ovary. Now, this is our last slide, and it looks complex, but it basically is nothing more than a little diagram showing what happens in a woman every single month. We're going to go through this together, and you'll see how it works. It's very interesting. The hypothalamus and the pituitary work together, and what they do is they produce a hormone called FSH. FSH is a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone, and you can see here what the letters stand for. Follicle stimulating hormone does exactly what it says it does. It stimulates a follicle to form in the ovary. Now, follicle is a space inside the ovary, that is fluid-filled space with the egg inside. That's the thing that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually exploding. So the FSH will end up in the bloodstream. It'll go to the ovary and start a follicle forming. Now, what that follicle will do will start produce a little bit of estrogen, female sex hormone, a steroid, very powerful hormone. And what that will do is get into the bloodstream from the follicle, this new follicle that's being formed here, and feed back to the pituitary gland through the bloodstream, causing the pituitary gland to make more FSH. If the pituitary gland makes more FSH, it causes the follicle to get bigger. The follicle will then make a little bit more estrogen. That'll feed back to the anterior pituitary. It'll make more FSH and keep going round and round like this. It's almost like blowing up a balloon. That's called positive feedback. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until something happens to stop it. So what will happen over about 14 days after her period's over, this FSH will start to be produced at, when the period is over, the bloody period is over. And it will just do this for about 14 days. And what that's going to do is going to keep growing that follicle bigger and bigger and bigger. And about the 14th day, here you see, the egg will be released from the follicle. It'll actually explode out like the picture showed you. At the same time, the pituitary will be making another hormone called luteinizing hormone, or LH. Lutein means yellow. So it's going to cause something to turn yellow. And what it's going to do, it's going to cause that empty follicle to turn into that corpus luteum, like I showed you, that yellow body. The egg is now sitting in the fallopian tube. If there's sperm, she'll get pregnant. If not, she won't. And the corpus luteum is now forming inside her ovary, this yellow body. And remember I said that the corpus luteum is going to make hormones. And what it's going to do is going to produce lots and lots and lots of estrogen and progesterone, a lot more estrogen than was produced up here. The extra estrogen, this high amount of estrogen, is going to feed back in her bloodstream and stop the pituitary gland from making any more FSH. That's negative feedback. This little bit of estrogen caused it to make more FSH, but a lot of estrogen stopped it. It's kind of like, I guess you can say, fertilizer on a lawn. A little bit of it causes the grass to grow better. Too much will kill it or stop it from growing. Same thing here. A lot of estrogen will feed back and shut down the FSH production. Why? Because at this point, the egg is in the fallopian tube. You don't need to start making another egg yet. So it shuts off the process until it waits to see if that egg is going to result in a pregnancy or not. At the same time, the corpus luteum, this yellow body in the ovary that used to be the follicle, is producing progesterone, another female sex hormone. The progesterone's target is the uterus. Once it gets into the uterus, it causes that endometrium wall of the uterus to thicken and become rich with rich bloody tissue, almost closing it up, and letting the egg, if it actually gets fertilized, the fertilized egg will be able to embed into that big bloody tissue and get nutrients from the blood there. In other words, she's ripe for a pregnancy now. She has the egg in the fallopian tube, and the uterus is swelling and thickening under the influence of progesterone to get it ready to nourish the baby. Now, there's two things that could happen here. One is that she can get pregnant, and one is that she doesn't get pregnant. If she does not get pregnant, what will happen eventually is that corpus luteum, that yellow body, will turn white and break down. When that happens, because the corpus luteum is making estrogen and progesterone at high levels, when that's gone, the estrogen and progesterone will drop, and that will make them go back to their normal amounts in the blood. That'll cause, because the progesterone goes down, that'll cause the uterus to go back to its regular size. So a lot of that extra thick bloody tissue and blood will be reabsorbed back into the body, but some of it gets leaked out through the vagina, and that's the menstruation period. That's about 4 or 5 days of menstruation. That's the uterus breaking down, getting that back to its regular size, and because it did not get, she didn't get pregnant. When the estrogen gets back to its normal level, it stops, because it was very high before, it was stopping the FSH. Now the FSH, because the estrogen is now lower, can start being made again, and this whole thing can start all over again for the next month. And the woman has to go through this every single month for God knows how many years, starting at something like age 11 or 12 all the way up to 60. It's something that a man can never even understand. Now, what if she gets pregnant? If she gets pregnant, the last thing the baby wants to do is have the uterus break down, because it'll come out with it. So what will happen is the baby makes its own little hormone. It's called human chorionic gonadotropic hormone, or just HCG. The baby makes that. If the baby makes that, it gets into the mom's blood from the baby, and it goes into the uterus. I'm sorry, into the ovary, and causes that corpus luteum to stay there. It will not break down for the whole entire 9 months of the pregnancy. It will stay yellow. Now remember, if that corpus luteum is being maintained by the HCG of the baby, that means that the progesterone is going to stay high, because that's what it was making, and that's going to keep the uterus high, thick, and being able to nourish the baby, and she'll have no period. This is the missing period, the signal of being pregnant. The estrogen will also remain high, because the corpus luteum is being kept intact throughout the pregnancy by the baby. And so that'll feed back and shut off the FSH. So she can't get pregnant again throughout the whole pregnancy. The last thing you want is a baby in there that's, 6 months along and then get pregnant again at that time with another baby. That would be horrible. So what happens is that if there is a pregnancy, the baby makes HCG, keeps the corpus luteum, that yellow body in the ovary, intact. That keeps the estrogen high, and that shuts off the FSH for the entire pregnancy. It keeps the progesterone high, and that keeps the uterus from breaking down, and she doesn't have periods throughout the pregnancy. Eventually, she'll produce a placenta, and the baby will grow for 9 months and get born 9 months later, and then this whole thing will start over. Okay, now in terms of the birth control pill, you can see now how it works. Remember, high estrogen caused the FSH to shut down. If the follicle becomes a corpus luteum after the egg is released, and that makes a lot of estrogen, the estrogen is going to shut off the FSH to in the meantime to see if she doesn't get pregnant or not, and that just started again only after the period's over. But if you take estrogen artificially, you'll keep the estrogen level high enough in your blood and to keep shutting off the FSH, and you'll never make a follicle. And if you don't make a follicle because you have high estrogen in your blood by taking the pill, then you can't make a baby. It's 99% effective. And the reason that they say 99 is because sometimes women forget to take the pill. It'll also keep you from having a period. So because the progesterone is in there too a little bit. And what will happen there is that you'll have a placebo in the birth control pills, which would allow you to lower your estrogen and progesterone levels for a few days throughout the month, and that will cause the uterus to break down, and you can actually have what's kind of a normal period. But that is how the system works, and I'll go through it real quickly one more time for you. The pituitary, after the bloody period's over, the menstruation portion is over. The anterior pituitary will make FSH. The FSH will go to a follicle into the ovary, cause a follicle to form. The follicle will make estrogen a little bit and that'll feed back to the pituitary, causing the follicle to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Remember, that was positive feedback. And then it'll eventually, 14 days later, get so big that it'll actually pop the egg out, and that's called ovulation. And the egg will go into the fallopian tube. At that point, the LH, or luteinizing hormone from the pituitary, will also cause that empty follicle now that used to have the egg in it to become a corpus luteum, a yellow body. The yellow body will produce copious or lots amounts of estrogen and progesterone. The estrogen will feed back and shut off the FSH so she doesn't make any more follicles for a while. And the progesterone will cause the uterus to thicken and get ready to nourish the baby. If there is no pregnancy, then the corpus luteum will eventually break down. Estrogen and progesterone will go back to their normal levels. The FSH will start being produced again for the next month, and the uterus will break down and get back to its normal size, and that will be the bloody period. If there is a pregnancy, the baby will make HCG hormone, and that will prevent her from having a period because it'll keep the corpus luteum in her ovary intact. The corpus luteum will keep making high levels of progesterone, which will go to the uterus and keep it thick and rich and able to nourish that baby, but it won't break down to have a bloody period. We'll also keep the estrogen high. The estrogen will then feed back in her bloodstream to the pituitary and keep her from making any more babies or any more follicles throughout her entire pregnancy, as long as the baby's in there making that hormone. Now, if that HCG gets into her bloodstream, which it will, it can be removed at the proximal convoluted tubule of the kidneys and get into the urine. And so that's what, when you check your urine to see if you're pregnant, one of the things you're looking for is this HCG hormone. If that's there, and since it's made by the baby, it's a pretty good indication that you are pregnant. So that's it, guys, for reproduction. And it's also at the end of our course. It's our very last recording. And so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed all of them and learned something from each one. There's going to be some assignments to do the last 2 weeks here, one on urinary system and one on reproductive system. You get those done and your term paper done, then you finish with the course and I can get you a grade. Okay. Have a nice rest of the year, and I hope that next year we'll go back to normal soon. Bye-bye now.